Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, I'll start with BankTech. So we're a strategic investment fund backed by over 100 community banks across the U.S. We invest in bank-enabling fintech companies. I've made 22 investments to date over the past 3 years. Mm-hmm. I am Pam. I work on the post-investment side as our head of bank technology. So I do all of our portfolio support post-investment and help our companies, one, help them figure out how to work together easier with banks. Two, help them figure out their product market fits, their literally A through Z of anything that they need to actually work with a bank. One of the major things that we do is take them through this banker-style due diligence process. Mm-hmm. So they really get that crucial lens on their company, how a bank will evaluate them.
I saw that you do audits, essentially, if their tech stack. So,
essentially, yes. Yeah. So similarly to when a bank is onboarding them as a potential vendor or some kind of partner with them, we'd also take them through this process. One, to make sure that they understand what that process is going to look like. Two, to help them find any gaps that they might have there. And then three, obviously help them figure out where we can plug in things for them to help build out that program long term.
And, do you have any relationships that you're able to pass along to from your perspective? Like, hey, you may want to connect with these parties, or is it more like you prepare them and then after the fact, they're on their own? Describe to me, beyond your portfolio company, if you will, the role in helping them relationship management.
Yeah, so we definitely have a short list of partners and third-party vendors and other things that we have formed our own relationships with that will either send them off to, like, here's a compliance lawyer, or here's somebody that offers like chief compliance officer as like a service to your company, or here's somebody else in the ecosystem that is going through the same thing as you, what they did, and you can figure out next steps. It really depends on the company, what stage they're at, what their comfort level is to even ask for help. But we are more than happy to help provide any services. I'm happy to help walk them through that myself with any of my own experience in banking in the past and guide them through, here's how a bank might look at this, or here's why this is okay for right now because you're an earlier stage company and we don't expect you to have XYZ built out, and here's how you can talk to the bank about why you are where you are. Right. So it just varies based on the company.
Got it. Katie?
So I'm on the investment side of the team, and that means that we're going out and sourcing companies and trying to find the best solutions that will help make our banks continue to be innovative, competitive. A lot of the diligence that we do mirrors what a diligence process might look like at a bank. At other more traditional funds, it's probably a lot lighter. We're putting them through a lot more diligence. And also a lot of what we do is looking through the lens of how can a bank actually use this, and thinking from that customer lens, as well as evaluating what kind of financial returns and other things that we can get. Really dual lens. I would say a big part of the value we provide to our limited partners is this market intelligence. We're meeting so many companies, we're seeing what's out there and going back to them and saying, here's kind of what we're seeing in the market, this is what you should be looking at, thinking about for your future, and making introductions. Even in the case we're not making investments, might be a solution that a bank needs where we can make that and facilitate that. So they're getting a lot of value beyond just financial returns from saying yes to investing in our fund.
Got it. And so maybe just shifting to the angle that I love to talk about, which is compliance. You mentioned the audits briefly. From either of your sides, or maybe both of your sides, do you have a methodology around compliance when you're evaluating an organization for fit? I know you've talked about auditing and reviewing, but from your perspective, how do you think about that when you're looking at prospective companies?
Well, one, we have the benefit of having Pam on our team, so as part of our diligence process, we'll bring her into the calls because she has the expertise of having worked at a bank. And I think a lot of what we'll ask them is about different things, like let's say generative AI, right? How is that data being used? Is it going to be shared? Let's talk through some of those. Just depending on what the solution is, there might be different sets of questions that we're looking at, but we are trying to do it from the frame of what would a bank be concerned about here and how can they evaluate that. We look at third-party risk management solutions for potentially investing in for our banks to use, but we've also looked from the side of, are there tools we should be using to be getting smarter and better in this area to go to that extra level of thinking and making sure that everything is intact. We have a pretty extensive list of the documents and things that we ask them for ahead of time.
Pam, back to you. When you're thinking about all the talk around third-party risk management, BaaS, fintech, bank partnerships, how do you see that in 2025 and beyond with the shifts in the regulatory environment? Like, do you think that anyone out there in DC is even thinking about this anymore?
Yeah, I actually just did a webinar on this last week. A lot of the conversations that I've heard from fintech lawyers or people in DC that are either lobbying or doing something in the space to try to figure out like what's next for banks. And advice that we've also gotten from some of these experts in the industry have been a lot of what is already out there in terms of regulation is not going to change very quickly. A conversation that we had last week with the American FinTech Council talked about how much time it'll actually take for it to go from up here down to the actual examination level and actually changing at the per bank level, and how your own bank's examiner might either decide to ignore certain things or decide this is the way I've been examining for 25 years and these are the things that I care about, and it's still going to be the things that I care about just in terms of like safety and soundness. We don't think that will change very quickly. These people that have been working there as career examiners have gone through many administrative changes and have had many different presidents, etc., agency heads tell them different things. But I think as we are humans, this is what we care about and these are the things that we're going to examine. I don't see that changing very quickly. I might be wrong, but hopefully I'm not, because I think that would bring a lot of instability into how banks are safe and sound. You know, we've seen banking crises in the past, and I think some of these things that came out in the last 10, 15 years were to help prevent additional crises like that. So I don't foresee a lot of things changing very quickly at the per bank examination level. I think it takes time for that messaging and communication to get down all the way down from executive to examiner. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a lag there. Again, it's very unprecedented times in terms of regulation and things. I think for sure there won't be any new regulations coming out very quickly. A lot of existing things that have been in the air over the last 1 to 3 years are, again, a big question mark of which of these are still going to be existing at the end of the year or even by summertime. But I think at the bank level, the banks still need to make sure that they're acting in a manner that is beneficial to their customers and keeping their customers' money and things safe. So I think at a core level, I don't see that changing very significantly. I think for sure new regulation is going to be neither here nor there. We don't know. Administratively, we're at a huge pendulum shift this way. Again, in 4 years, 3-4 years, it might swing right back the other way or somewhere in the middle. So I think people that are doing these jobs day to day understand that and are hopefully not trying to get swept away in the, oh no, everything's changing now.
Yeah, and I think there was similar talk in 2016, and if anything, the focus was on larger institutions getting hit even harder. So who knows what the future holds to some extent. I wanted to circle to AI. From the compliance angle, one topic that I've been having some conversations about is like AI and fairness of evaluations of customers and that sort of thing. So I'm curious, what are some positive developments, any examples that you've seen about companies that have used AI to really solve issues of fairness, or from a credit perspective, any stories of companies doing it right and solving some of the problems around lending using AI in a compliant fashion? Maybe that's kind of a unicorn, who knows, but would love to get your take on that.
Yeah, Katie's actually our BankTech AI experts. I don't know if you want to add anything on that specifically. We've definitely seen companies specifically working with fairness and how AI is going to play into that in the lending space. I don't know that banks have been super quick to adopt solutions like that as of yet. I think, again, it's a big regulatory question mark. So it's been a little slow play of let's see how it goes. I think the larger institutions are more likely to engage in those types of conversations.
It's the large institutions that many would argue need to be disrupted. They've kind of created the problem, right? Folks getting shut out of the system.
We talk to our banks about what they're using AI for. It's mostly back office compliance and creating an efficiency piece because they are worried about this regulatory piece. So thinking about fair lending or how they just don't even want to get swept up into that, even though we believe that there's so much possibility for loan volume to be done faster, more efficiently, and potentially helping like on the SMB side. If you can now do these smaller dollar loans and do them as efficiently as you can these larger loans, then you're going to say yes to them. Whereas before you only had the bandwidth, the resources to do these larger ones. So you're going to say no, but then it does bring into what you're talking about. Where does the fairness come in and understanding the data that's going into the model that you're creating. So we've spent time looking at, is model risk management now going to be more something that our banks need to bring on? And so is that a standalone tool where the banks need to do this and be doing it and they'll have a lot more models coming in because they have technology to do things? Or is it something where we say yes to a lending solution that has MRM built into it? And so each individual tool has its own safety guard around it. The ones that I think are probably being smartest about doing some of this and evaluating the models and keeping them in check are using some form of generative AI, but then also using that traditional machine learning and creating so that they're testing their model. In some ways, it's keeping it in check because it's deterministic. So you can say, is this a yes or no? And if there's red flags, you can then come and check them. But I think it's just that loan space is just tricky right now. And it's hard, especially for the larger banks. They have such large volume. Sure. I think that a lot of the companies are using data sets from these larger companies and larger swaths. So then when they're doing their loans, they actually can mimic more what the larger banks are seeing. At these smaller institutions, the models and what's being created may not actually mimic their customer set. And they may not have enough volume in what they've done historically to do that. And so they have to look into things like creating synthetic data. And then to your point, you get into that, like, how do we think about creating fairness in this? Right. Or are we just creating synthetic data on top of historically bad data? And I honestly think the answer has been, we just don't want to deal with that right now. It's just not going to be the first place we go to for AI, which is not a very satisfying answer, but that's where we are. It just hasn't been a top priority. And I don't think until there's really clear ROI and also a clarity on what's regulation going to look like for using AI to do underwriting, that there's going to be a large take. But what I do think is that the companies who are using underwriting, they need to build in their own version of model risk management into it, and that they need to assure them and create some really easy ways for the bank to talk to their regulator about, this is what we're using, this is how we're getting our data, and helping them have the conversation and put it into really approachable terminology and clearly explain that they understand the data that's going in, the data that's coming out. And that's, I think, what we spend a lot of our time evaluating and also talking to our companies about, how do you help empower the bank to have these conversations so that the regulator can say yes to it. I would say one of our banks that has been in the forefront of adopting AI solutions, and specifically generative AI solutions, has really gone back and looked at their third-party risk management and continued to add additional questions and depth to what they're doing. So to them, this is still evaluating a solution. We know how to do this, and so let's put this in our framework, but just develop it into a stronger way. And I think that also makes it more approachable for banks. They have the capability to do this. They just need to dig in deeper in the right spaces, and that might mean now adding, again, like, model risk management becomes part of that conversation more than it had been previously, or just bringing in other parts. But I do think it's still part of that same process, just making it larger and expanding on that.
I heard model governance. I rarely hear that term as a compliance person. You want to hear more of that. It's closing on a somewhat lighter note. You mentioned American FinTech Council. So my understanding is there's a partnership that has recently been established. So maybe just talk a little bit about that and some of the advantages you could see, especially from a compliance perspective, in terms of how you're dealing with companies, your partners, et cetera, and just for the organization in general, BankTech.
Yeah, I think that was a partnership long in the making, needed to happen a long time ago. We've been very close with them for a while. I think we have a lot of strategic alignment both on the bank and fintech side. Of course, they represent both banks and fintechs. For us, it's great to be able to keep a pulse on what are some of the regulations and things coming down the pipeline. What side are we standing on, and how can we help support that, and how do we communicate those back down to the fintechs and banks that we work with as well? Because that's obviously a big part of us as a strategic investor for both the fintech and bank side, is that we help them figure out and navigate this space. So that's been a great pulse check for us in DC and just at the state level as well. And I think great for our portfolio companies to be able to connect into that and help have a voice of what they think regulation should be and how certain regulations impact them, and again, what side should they stand on. Same for the banks. We help them keep a pulse on the ecosystem, on fintech, on BaaS, on regulation. So I think we will have a great opportunity to work very closely with the American FinTech Council on some of those things, like, here's what we're hearing on the bank side, and here's what we're hearing on the fintech side, and being able to collaborate and help create unified messaging for the entire ecosystem based on that.
And that was the end of our conversation. I want to thank Pam and Katie for their time and for an insightful and fun conversation. Thanks for joining us on another edition of FinTech Compliance Chronicles podcast.